Someone is going to say something to you today that is designed to knock you off balance. Maybe they already have. A comment that stings, a challenge you didn't see coming, a moment where your mind went blank, and hours later, in the shower, you finally thought of what you should have said. The Stoics had a name for that feeling. They called it being conquered without a sword. By the end of this video, you'll have 7 responses so calm, so precise, so stoically grounded, they don't just answer the person in front of you, they silence the noise inside you. And I'm not going to give them to you in order of difficulty by accident. I'm going to build them, one on top of the other, from the smallest sting you'll face this week to the deepest wound you'll ever carry. Stay with me. Wisdom of the Stoics, ancient philosophy, modern battles. Let's get into it. Here's the foundation everything else stands on. Epictetus, a man born a slave who had his leg broken by his own master, wrote this in his discourses. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. Not the event, your story about the event. Marcus Aurelius put it even tighter, writing to himself in a journal he never intended anyone to read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. This doesn't mean words don't hurt. Seneca wrote entire letters about the wounds language can leave. It means the wound and your response to the wound are 2 separate events, and only one of them is yours to control. All 7 responses live in that gap. Let's start small. Response 1. I may be wrong. 3 words. Sit with how uncomfortable they feel. Your instinct says this is weakness. The Stoics said the opposite. Epictetus, a man born a slave who had his leg broken by his own master, wrote this in his discourses. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. He wasn't performing humility. He was defending against what the Stoics called fantasia, the false certainty of an untested impression. Here's why it works. The person needling you online or texting you something passive-aggressive wants your ego to show up and fight. A defensive ego is predictable and manageable. But I may be wrong, said without performance, gives them nothing to push against. There's a story of a student cornering Epictetus, arguing loudly that his teaching was inconsistent. Epictetus reportedly smiled. You may have found an error I haven't. Tell me more. The argument had nowhere to go. The Stoics had a word for this, aligning yourself with truth over ego, oikeiosis. When you affiliate with what's accurate instead of what protects your image, you become genuinely hard to defeat because you've already agreed in advance to surrender anything that turns out to be wrong. Think of someone in your life who makes you go instantly defensive. What changes if your first internal question the next time they push is simply, could they be right? This is easy to try on something small, a rude comment, a snippy reply. But it only works when the person attacking you is being honest, even if they're being harsh. What happens when honesty isn't the point at all? When someone is trying to humiliate you in front of a room full of people? That takes something else entirely.
Response 2. Silence. Raise the stakes. You're in a meeting. A colleague makes a dismissive comment about your work in front of everyone. Every cell in your body wants to defend itself immediately. Seneca warned Lucilius to retire into yourself as much as you can and to avoid those who groan over everything, not through argument, but through withdrawal. Here's the mechanism. When someone attacks you publicly, they're seeking an energy transaction. They want your fear, your scrambling justification. That energy feeds the exchange. Silence starves it. Not cold silence, not sulking silence, stoic silence. The silence of someone who looked at what was said, weighed it, and found it insufficient to require a response. Marcus Aurelius called this watchfulness prosochi, noticing the impulse to fill every gap with self-defense and asking, does this moment need my voice? As emperor, surrounded by senators baiting him and generals testing him, the historical record shows the same pattern again and again. He paused before speaking and often didn't speak at all. When you respond immediately, you hand people a map of exactly which buttons work. When you meet a public jab with measured stillness, you reveal nothing, and you remain, as the Stoics would put it, free. The ancient world had a name for this quality, megalopsychia, greatness of soul. It was defined specifically as the ability to stay unmoved when everyone in the room expects you to move. That's the part most people miss about silence. It isn't the absence of a response. In a room full of people waiting for you to flinch, choosing not to is the loudest thing you can do. But silence assumes the attack is worth ignoring. What do you do when you can't just go quiet, when the other person is standing right in front of you, demanding a reaction, and disengaging isn't an option? Response 3. That's an interesting perspective. Now it's personal. A friend, someone close to you, tells you flatly that a decision you made about your career, your relationship, your life was wrong. Not cruelly, just certain, and their certainty is contagious. Epictetus opens the Enchiridion with the line everything else in Stoicism rests on. Some things are in our control, others are not. That's an interesting perspective, is that distinction turned into speech. It doesn't concede, it doesn't argue. It says, I've heard you, I've registered that this view exists, and I'm choosing not to make it mine. The Stoics were fascinated by sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things, but just as fascinated by its shadow side, our tendency to unconsciously absorb other people's certainty, their anxieties, their judgments. They called that absorption pathe, disturbance from outside. This phrase is a firewall against it. It creates diastema, distance between the impression and your response. But it only works if you mean it, if you're genuinely curious rather than performing calm while seething underneath. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, reminding himself each morning that the people he'd deal with would be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and then adding, not to tolerate them, but to recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. That works when someone is wrong about your choices. It's much harder when you're not sure they're wrong at all, when part of you suspects they might have a point, and you simply don't know yet.
We live in a culture that rewards speed. React instantly, or you lose the room. The Stoics saw this coming 2,000 years early and called it a direct path to hamartia, missing the mark. Seneca kept a daily review specifically because time reveals what haste conceals. This response does three things. First, it protects logos, reason, from being overrun by impulse and ego. Second, it disarms the other person, because taking someone seriously enough to actually think is a form of respect almost nobody expects mid-argument. Third, it buys you hypomone, patient endurance, the ability to sit in not having an answer yet without needing to fill that silence with noise. Cassius Dio records that Marcus Aurelius, presiding over legal disputes, was known for asking follow-up questions, requesting time, and sleeping on decisions before rendering them, while other emperors were praised in their own day for ruling fast and decisively, and are remembered now for ruling badly. History sided with the slow one. In practice, this response transforms the confrontation the moment you say it and mean it. It shifts the exchange from a battle to a negotiation, from heat to light, because the other person came ready for resistance and instead got consideration. Most people have no script for that. If you only take one thing from this video and act on it this week, it's this line. Try it once, in an ordinary moment, not a crisis, just a normal disagreement, and watch what it does to the temperature of the room. And if this is already landing for you, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because we go this deep every time. But let me think about that assumes you have room to think. What happens when the stakes aren't a debate anymore? When someone you respect deeply tells you that you're wrong about something that matters to you? Response 5. You might be right. This is the outward twin of response 1.
I may be wrong was inward, private. You might be right is spoken to someone whose opinion actually threatens yours, a mentor, a partner, someone whose respect you don't want to lose. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught that the goal of debate was never to win, it was to arrive at truth. A philosopher who enters an argument hoping to win rather than to learn has already failed, regardless of the outcome. Saying you might be right genuinely, without performance, models what the Stoics called eunoia, goodwill, a real desire for someone else's thinking to illuminate something true. People feel the difference between that and theater instantly. It doesn't mean capitulation. It means holding someone's position open as a live possibility instead of a threat. Seneca wrote that the first step to becoming good is wanting to be good. The conversational parallel, the first step to a real exchange, is wanting to be changed by it. Think about the last time someone actually convinced you of something. In almost every case, it wasn't the force of their argument that moved you. It was the feeling that they respected you enough to want you to understand rather than to defeat you. You might be right is how you hand someone that feeling, even in the hardest conversations. Here's the harder version of this same test. What happens when it's not a mentor questioning your judgment, it's someone who's supposed to be on your side, and their words don't feel like feedback, they feel like betrayal?
This doesn't require my reaction. This one is mostly said to yourself in the half-second before you say something you'll regret for hours. But sometimes, said calmly and without cruelty, it's spoken aloud, and it lands hard. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around proairesis, the faculty of choice, the one thing he considered truly, permanently yours. Everything else, your reputation, other people's opinions, even your own life, he filed under ta hecta, externals, not ultimately in your control. This doesn't require my reaction is proairesis in action. It's the one freedom nobody can take from you, the choice of where your energy goes. Marcus Aurelius framed obstacles in almost military terms. The impediment to action advances action, but he balanced it with a harder truth. Not every obstacle is meant to be fought. Some are tests of whether you can recognize them as not your battle at all. Picture it directly. A family member brings up an old failure at dinner in front of everyone, not to wound you exactly, just carelessly, the way people do when they've stopped thinking about how their words land. Your face flushes. Every instinct says defend yourself, explain, correct the record. The Stoic question isn't how do I win this? It's what's the best outcome in the next 60 seconds and what's the best outcome in the next 60 days. Those two answers are often completely different, and the Stoic always takes the longer one, because a corrected record tonight is worth far less than the relationship 6 months from now. That's strategic withdrawal from other people's carelessness, but there's one voice you can't withdraw from, because it doesn't come from someone else at all. It comes from the truth, spoken by someone who's actually right about you. Response 7. Thank you for telling me. This is the hardest of the 7, not because it's linguistically complex, it's 4 words, but because it demands the deepest grounding to actually mean it. In Book 1 of the Meditations, Marcus Aurelius lists the people who shaped him and what each one taught him. He thanks his teacher, Rusticus, for showing him his character needed discipline. He thanks his adoptive grandfather for teaching him gentleness. He isn't thanking people who made his life easy. He's thanking the people who made him better, and he's honest that those were rarely the same people. The Stoics called this discipline amor fati, the love of what happens rather than resistance to it. Nietzsche made the phrase famous centuries later, but it's Stoic to the bone. Thank you for telling me is amor fati applied to conversation, the recognition that criticism, even hostile, even unwelcome, carries information about the gap between how you see yourself and how you actually land in the world. The Stoics weren't sentimental about this. Epictetus was clear that you evaluate feedback with reason, not accept everything blindly. But he was equally clear that the reflex to dismiss feedback, to protect yourself from it, is one of the most reliable signs that a person has stopped growing. Seneca described a nightly practice of his own, reviewing the day before sleep, asking himself what habit he'd resisted, what fault he'd corrected, in what way he was better. He wrote that a day is only truly yours once you've gathered everything it offered, including the difficult parts, the ones that required someone telling you something you didn't want to hear, and you saying, "Thank you for telling me," and meaning it. Not because every criticism deserves gratitude on its face, but because the willingness to hear it without flinching is itself the discipline.
Here's what all 7 had been building toward. There's a version of you that never scrambles for words again. Not because you memorized 7 clever lines, but because you've internalized something underneath them. You are not your reputation. You are not other people's opinions of you. You are not your worst moment. You are, as Marcus Aurelius put it to himself at the end of a long day ruling an empire, a soul governing a body, clear, grounded, and answering to itself alone. No word, no provocation, no person on earth can silence you, because you were never making noise in the first place. Let's bring it back to where we started. A text message that stung, a comment that knocked you off balance, a room where your mind went blank. Here's the ladder we just climbed. 1. I may be wrong. The courage of intellectual humility for the small, honest jabs. 2. Silence for the public ones that want an audience. 3. That's an interesting perspective, the firewall for the peoples whose certainty tries to become yours. 4. Let me think about that. The dignity of not rushing when the stakes rise. 5. You might be right. Real openness when someone you respect challenges you. 6. This doesn't require my reaction. Strategic withdrawal when the wound is careless rather than intentional. 7. Thank you for telling me. The deepest discipline when the truth actually hits. None of these become yours by watching a video. Epictetus called the daily practice of philosophy ascesis, training. Marcus Aurelius didn't write the Meditations because he'd mastered Stoicism. He wrote it because he was still training every single day, surrounded by war, plague, and betrayal, holding himself accountable to the person he was trying to become. So here's what I'd actually ask of you. Pick one of these 7, just one, and use it once tomorrow on something small and ordinary. Not a crisis, just a normal moment where you feel the old pull to react fast, defensively, emotionally. Use the Stoic response instead, and come back and tell me what happened. If this gave you something today, subscribe and pass it to one person who needs to hear it. That's how philosophy has always survived, person to person, one conversation at a time.